Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host, continuing down the lane of the Psychopath bag of tricks, referencing again, Without Conscience, The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us by Robert D Hare PhD. The next section in his chapter, Words from an Overcoat Pocket, is entitled, Where Was I? ? He tells us that it now appears that the communications of psychopaths sometimes are subtly odd and part of a general tendency to, quote, go off track, end quote. That is, they frequently change topics. They go off on irrelevant tangents and fail to connect phrases and sentences in a straightforward manner. The storyline, though somewhat disjointed, may seem acceptable to a casual listener. For example, one of his male psychopaths asked by a female interviewer to describe an intense emotional event, and here is his response.
Well, that's a tough one. So many to think about. I remember once, I went through this red light and there was no traffic, right? Oh, what's the big deal? The cop started to hassle me for no reason, and he really pissed me off. I didn't really go through the red light. It was probably only yellow. So what's his, point? Trouble with cops is that most of them are on a power trip. They act macho, right? I'm not really into macho. I'm more of a lover. What do you think? I mean, if I wasn't in prison, say we met at a party, and I asked you out, I bet you'd say yes, wouldn't you?
The narrative was accompanied by expansive hand movements and exaggerated facial expressions that blinded the interviewer to what was happening. However, the videotape of the interview clearly revealed to everybody, including this embarrassed interviewer, that the man not only had gone off track, but had trapped her into a flirtatious exchange. Psychopaths are notorious for not answering the question posed them, or for answering in a way that seems unresponsive to the question. For an example, one psychopath in their research asked if his moods went up and down, gave the reply of,
up and down? Well, you know, some people say they're always nervous, sometimes they seem pretty calm. I guess their moods go up and down. I remember once, I was feeling low and my buddy came over and we watched the game on TV. And, we had a bet on, and he won, and I felt pretty horribly.
Psychopaths also sometimes make it difficult for the listeners to understand parts of the narrative. Quote,
I met these guys in a bar. One guy was a dealer and the other was a pimp. They started to hassle me and I punched them out,
said one of their psychopaths. But was it the dealer or the pimp who was punched out? Of course, minor breakdowns in communication are not uncommon in regular people. In many cases, they represent little more than carelessness or a momentary lapse in their concentration. But in the psychopath people, the breakdowns are more frequent, more serious, and possibly indicative of an underlying condition in which the organization of mental activity, but not its content, is defective. It is how they string their words and sentences together, not what they actually say, that suggests abnormality. In contrast, both the form and the content of schizophrenic communications are characteristically odd and bizarre. For example, one of the subjects, who later received a diagnosis of schizophrenia, replied to the question,
do your moods go up and down?
As follows.
I'm just such a believer, that life is so short and that we're here for such a short time, and so we're all gonna die anyway at one stage. So then, we pass on to a totally new strata, and all the problems of this world for us are solved. And then we have a new set of problems and a new set of joys. Whichever one, it's not something I claim to understand.
This reply is odd in both form and content, and is difficult to understand. This creature's reply to the same question described above, although tangential and somewhat strange, can be interpreted as being glib or evasive. We can infer some sort of meaning more readily from his reply than we can from the schizophrenic's reply. It's well known that these psychopath preachers often convincingly linger fake mental illnesses when it is to their advantage. advantage to do so. For example, an inmate, Dr. Hare described earlier, was able to con his way into a psychiatric unit and then back out again by slanting his responses to the questions on a widely used psychological test. A particularly revealing illustration of this creature's ability to manipulate experienced psychiatrists and psychologists is provided in Terry Gainey's book about Charles Hatcher, who killed at least 16 people because it gave him a thrill. Following a charge for murdering a 6-year-old boy, he was shuttled back and forth between the courts and a forensic psychiatric hospital. Psychiatrists appointed by the court determined that this guy was incompetent to stand trial, but the psychiatrists at the hospital considered him competent to stand trial. And so it went, back and forth. After a seemingly endless series of contradictory psychiatric evaluations, Hatcher tired of the game and turned his talents to outmaneuvering the lawyers in the court. However, the evidence presented in this chapter suggests that it may not be the psychopath's skill at manipulation that sometimes makes it difficult for clinicians to evaluate his or her sanity. An interview in which a psychopath's statements are contradictory, tangential, or poorly connected to one another is bound to influence astute clinical judgment. For example, the trial of John Wayne Gacy, the Chicago businessman and serial killer who performed as the clown Pogo for the sick children, was marked by contradictory psychiatric testimony. Prosecution experts argued that he was a psychopath and sane, whereas defense experts said that he was psychotic and insane. One psychologist said that he was a psychopathic or antisocial personality with sexual deviation, and that during interviews, Gacy's statements were marked by contradictions, evasiveness, rationalizations, and excuses. A psychiatrist noted that Gacy liked to talk. Under cross-examination, the psychiatrist was asked if Gacy's effusive stream of talk didn't demonstrate loose associations, a characteristic of schizophrenia. When Mr. Gacy says on one hand he killed someone, on the next hand he said he didn't do it, is that loose association? The psychiatrist replied,
I think that's lying. Think he doesn't remember what he says from one day to the next because he lies.
The jury rejected Gacy's insanity plea and recommended the death sentence. Gacy's loose association and his contradictory statements and lies may reflect little more than mental carelessness, or a lack of interest in keeping things straight for the listener, or a part of a strategy intended to confuse whoever's listening. However, in the context of the material presented in this chapter, they also may stem from a condition in which continuity among mental events and the self-monitoring of speech are defective, perhaps even disordered. Mental scrabble without an overall script. This raises one important issue. If their speech is sometimes peculiar, why are these creatures so believable, so capable of deceiving and manipulating us? Why do we fail to pick up the inconsistencies in what they're saying? The short answer is it's difficult to penetrate their mask of normalcy. The oddities in their speech are often too subtle for the casual observer to detect, and they put on a good show. We are sucked in not by what they say, but how they say it, and by the emotional buttons that they push while they're saying it. The next and last section of this chapter is, does this mean they're crazy? Contradictory, inconsistent statements. Emotional poverty. I'm sure that by now you are troubled by a nagging question. Are these people sane? Are we back to the old mad versus bad debate? Following a lecture that Dr. Hare gave on psychopathy and language at a psychiatric conference in Florida, a forensic psychiatrist approached him and said,
Your research implies that psychopaths may be mentally disordered, perhaps not as responsible for their behavior as we once thought. Until now, a diagnosis of psychopathy has been the kiss of death for many murderers. Will it now become the kiss of life for them?
An interesting question. Psychopaths do meet current legal and psychiatric standards for sanity. They understand the rules of society and the conventional meanings of right and wrong. They are capable of controlling their behavior, and they are aware of the potential consequences of their acts. Their problem is that this knowledge frequently fails to deter them from the antisocial behavior. Still, some observers argue that these creatures are deficient in the mental and emotional mechanisms needed to translate their knowledge of the rules into behavior acceptable to our society. If they have failed to develop a conscience, and if they're unable to experience guilt or remorse, and they have difficulty in monitoring their behavior and its effect on others, the argument runs, then surely they are at a serious disadvantage compared to the rest of us. They understand the intellectual rules of the game, but the emotional rules are lost on them. This modern version of the old concept of moral insanity may make some theoretical sense, but it's not relevant to practical decisions about criminal responsibility. In Dr. Hare's opinion, psychopaths certainly know enough about what they're doing in order to be held accountable for their actions. My experience with these types of creatures, I have heard the language that they use that doesn't make a lot of sense. And in the very beginning of my journey on this horrible path with these creatures, I would just listen to what they said and internally think, well, that seems strange, but wouldn't really push them further on it. However, later on down the line, I started to recognize these foolish words, and I would start to question them. Let's use a real example. I had a guest over, and I had a CD playing a song, and it happens to be one of my favorites, of which I just kept to myself. I happened to notice that the person that was there, hearing it, said,
"That's a great song. Oh, wow. It's a really good tune."
and I took a mental note of that. Oh, this person likes that song, because sometimes people don't like songs that I do. About 2 weeks later, same person in the home, same CD playing, and the person actually said,
"This song is one of the worst ones I've heard."
I kept it to myself, but I thought, wait a second, just 2 weeks ago this was a great song and now it isn't? And it hasn't been played between then and now? I think these creatures just use whatever they need for the moment without considering what it means as far as the long run or the whole picture. We're looking at them like they're a real person. And a real person, if that song came on again, it would be,
"Oh, wow, there's that great song again. I like that. Oh, turn it up louder."
but no, it's a different reaction that's completely opposite of the one before, which is concerning. It indicates you're dealing with a phony. Hearing these types of statements and contradictory words, it's tempting for us to say something, which again depends on the level of how far you know them. If they're somebody new, you might keep it to yourself, or like I would be daring and say, wait a second, just a second ago you'd said this and now you said that. Which is it? Previously I would have just sat there and listened and then wondered privately, now why would it say this? And if it's in the new stages of someone that you've met and you do question, they'll probably do some kind of gaslighting, some kind of claiming, oh, you misunderstood what I meant. I meant this, and they'll try to make up for it, but a lot of times they don't.
I am the Narcopath. Remember me?
What's the matter? You don't recognize me? Oh, when I was dating you, I was a country lesbian girl. Honey, those days are over. Don't be so shocked about my new appearance. If you need the truth, I only dressed up like a country girl because that's what you were. You were a country guy. I tend to be like a human chameleon for my targets, as you all call them. If you're a country guy and I'm interested in you because you got a big bank account, I'm gonna start dressing up as a country girl. Honey, that was your thing. Country girl's over for me, honey. I'm not doing that thing anymore. I found a goth guy, and he's rich. He does film producing. He's gonna be my ticket to ride. I had to change my appearance. I think it looks beautiful, don't you? I'm the most beautiful I've ever been. Far cry from my no makeup, denim clothing, and lesbian wear. I don't wear that anymore. Ah, look at this old rag I dug up. I used to wear this pattern. That's a tablecloth. That is disgusting. I am a temptress now. I'm a goth chick. I'm hot. And my new lover loves me, unlike you ever could. Accept it. Plus, I found Jesus, which translates to Lucifer. Oh, well, I guess it would be nice if I could touch your body. I know not everybody has got a body like me. Oh, but I gotta think twice before I give my heart away. And I know all the games you play because I play them too. Oh, but I need some time off from that emotion. It's time to get my heart back up. Oh, when I look showing you the door.